So folks, where I'm standing now about 3 years ago was a giant pile of concrete blocks ready to build our extension. And since we were lumbered with the task of managing the build ourselves, it fell down to us to make sure we ordered the right amount of materials and that everything arrived at the right time. That basically meant turning these architect plans into a giant shopping list. So how did we know what to buy? How much concrete for the foundations? How many concrete blocks and bricks? How much timber? Well, that's what today's video is all about. Not standing out there, it's bloody Baltic. Do you remember this little kitten, by the way? Welcome back to the show. Nugget wants to go down. Here you go. Folks, today we are talking about the gripping subject of estimating or quantity surveying, and whether you're building a bench for your greenhouse or an entire house, the process, I think, is more or less the same. It's worth pointing out at this stage that I know squat about quantity surveying, and there's probably much more efficient ways of going about things. More about that towards the end of the video. But for me and my control freak tendencies, there was really only one option, and that was to visualize the entire build in SketchUp and then translate that into a giant shopping list in a spreadsheet. To keep things relatively simple, we're going to talk about the concrete for the foundations, the brick and block work for the walls, all of the structural timber work, and we'll touch on insulation as well. A couple of tips before starting a reasonable sized project like this. We had 3 sets of drawings to work from. We obviously had the main architect plans designed to get us through planning permission. We then had a set of detailed plans from the architect designed to get us through all the building regulations side of things, and we had a full set of structural engineer drawings as well. If you're lacking any of those and you've never managed to build before, you're going to struggle. We also had an amazing experienced bricklayer, and although he wanted nothing to do with the ordering of materials or managing the build, he did kind of keep us right, and that was normally in the form of saying something like, "Andy, can you make sure there's another 200 blocks on the second lift by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning?" So me and Mrs. Mac would be up either very late or very early, making sure everything was prepared, ready for our bricklayer starting first thing. And I'll save my final top tip for the end of the video, but for now, let's crack on. Before we could do anything, we needed to order some concrete for the foundations. That entailed phoning up the concrete company and saying we needed to buy however many cubic meters of concrete. We had no clue how many cubic meters of concrete we needed, so first things first, we headed over to the structural engineer plans to work all of that out. So here's a section of the structural engineer drawings that show the foundation design. And just so you can orientate yourselves, the kitchen window is just over here and the bifolds are shown over on the right here. Ignore this entire left-hand area because the plans were changed a few times and eventually we decided to get rid of that, bring that whole wall in, and that gave us much better front to rear access and made life a lot easier on the drainage front. So with that in mind, we're looking at the section details, and that is shown with this kind of symbol here, and we're looking at section 1, and if we scroll down a little bit, we're looking at section 3, which is the overpinned foundations for the garage wall. So here's section 1, which is the foundations basically under the entire rear single story extension, and there's 2 main measurements we're looking at here. How deep do they need to be and how wide do they need to be? And this is showing that it needs to be at least 900 millimeters deep and at least 600 millimeters wide. It also says the concrete needs to be poured at least to a thickness of 225 millimeters, but we're going to be going way beyond that with full fill trench foundations. More about that in a minute. The other thing worth noting here is the type of concrete. So it says grade RC35, and he's also spec'd A193 mesh reinforcement, 40 millimeters above ground level. And then the other thing we needed to take a look at was the overpin foundations, and the key dimensions we've got from this is that the foundations need to be at least 450 millimeters wide and at least 450 millimeters deep, and they're to be overpinned and cast over the top of our neighbour's existing foundations. So obviously I had the original plans that we'd been playing with in SketchUp, and SketchUp is so useful for a project like this because it just lets you visualize everything and play around with the design. So from there I made a much more detailed model. So you get a vague idea of what's going on here. Obviously we also had to cater for this drainage run going underneath everything as well, so we had to follow the waterboard specifications for how things need to be built over a sewer. We decided that we wanted to go for full fill trench foundations, and that basically means that we're going to pour the concrete to a much higher level. It means that you're paying for more concrete, but it also means that you're buying less trench blocks, and it makes life a lot easier for the brickie. Not to mention obviously having much thicker foundations. So what we did was we got our bricklayer around after we'd dug the foundations, and we got him to have a look at where the existing house foundations ran up to, and in the end we decided it would probably be easiest if we just run the trench foundations up to the depth of the existing foundations of the house, which are much shallower than these new foundations anyway. You can kind of get an idea if we look from the back of the property here. So here are the new foundations, here's the existing house foundations. They all have to be tied in with each other with rebar, resin cast into the existing foundations. But the general plan of attack is that we'll bring these up to the same level, and that meant, if I get the tape measure out in SketchUp, that they are going to have to be 650 millimeters deep. So I'm not going to dwell on this for ages because it's boring, but we know the length, we know the width, we know the depth of the foundations for each little section. So we basically just need to add all of that up to get the volume of concrete required in cubic meters. So that came out at about 8.2 cubic meters. Knock off a bit for the gaps around the sewer, add on a bit for our badly dug trenches, but either way, that's a whole lot of concrete. The thing to bear in mind here is that 1 cubic meter of concrete is about 20 wheelbarrows. So at 8 cubic meters, that's 160 wheelbarrows. That ain't happening. So we booked a volumetric mixer and a concrete pump. I'm not sure if concrete companies exist who do their own pumping, but we had to book the two separately. Both were amazing. The pumping company dealt with the concrete company all the time, so they liaised with each other to make sure they turned up together. All I had to do was mark out the depths on the trenches and make sure everything was level as it was going in. But generally speaking, I just kept out the road and let the experts get on with it. It's also worth checking with your concrete company how much they can deliver in a single load. In our case, the volumetric mixer had a capacity of 9 cubic meters, so the truck was more or less dedicated to our pour. Volumetric mixers are great because they come with dry ingredients and mix the concrete on demand. The nice thing about this is that you pay for exactly what you use, but you still need to give them a vague idea of how much concrete you need so that they can plan out their day in terms of how many deliveries they can do with a single truck. Anyway, within about 30 minutes, 8.1 cubic meters of concrete was poured, which wasn't far off my estimate. For what it's worth, the concrete cost £1,176.12 and the pump cost £432, which was worth every penny. It took longer to pump the water out of the trenches after a week of biblical rain than it did to pump the concrete in the first place. So then we're onto the walls, and there's basically 3 things going on here for our brickie to deal with. We've got trench blocks below ground level, we've got engineering bricks for anything visible below DPC level, and then we've got concrete blocks behind the render for pretty much everywhere else. Now bear in mind we were still lost in the mad world of COVID when we built this, so we had to pre-order pretty much everything to make sure we didn't run out of materials once the brickie started. This was the scary bit. These blocks are heavy and you really don't want to end up with too many of them. So back to our model in SketchUp, and what are we actually building? Well, we're adding this whole kind of single story bit on the back, and we're adding this side bit here. So the foundations are now obviously poured to a height that the brickie is happy with. Back when this house was built, I mean, the foundations of the existing house are tiny and really shallow compared to the new foundations, and then the cavity wall is just built straight on top of the foundations, but that's a lot of extra work putting bricks underground. So what we do nowadays is we use things called trench blocks, because you don't really need a cavity wall underground, and they're much quicker to lay. They're the full width of the wall, so they're 300 millimeters wide. Obviously this was back when you were allowed 100mm cavities on walls. So the trench blocks are pretty easy to work out. You could literally just count them. We've got 42 on each side, 84 along the back wall, and then looking from underneath we've got another 21 at the back of the garage. So that's 189 in total. We ordered 195 to be on the safe side. So coming over to our magic spreadsheet, we've already talked about the concrete, so that's kind of done. And here are our trench blocks, 195 of them, £1.75 each, so that's £341.25 on trench blocks. So that was pretty much spot on. We definitely didn't end up with any trench blocks left over. Then engineering bricks. So as I say, these are going below damp-proof course level, but they only need to be on the visible side of the wall. So we don't really need them on the internal leaf other than to fill in little awkward gaps and things like that. But we don't want to be rendering below DPC level, and engineering bricks look nicer. So simple area calculation there. We're looking at this row here. So 7.88 long, 300mm high, that gives a total area of 2.36 square meters, and we've got the two sides as well, 4.04, blah blah blah. So that is the area of one side. So we've just got a highly complex formula there to work out the total area, which is 4.79 square meters. And this is where it's useful to know how many bricks and blocks and things you need per square meter. So I've marked that on this spreadsheet here. So bricks per square meter, 60 per square meter. We'll mark that in green. And I haven't made a note of it here, but you're normally looking around 500 bricks per pallet. So although we've said we need 4.79 square meters, if we go for 8 square meters, you know, it's roughly 60 bricks per square meter, so that's 480. That's pretty much a pallet of bricks. So we might as well just get a pallet of engineering bricks, because we're going to need them elsewhere on the build anyway, and they're really useful to have. Even if I don't use them all, we can use them on other projects. In the end, I think we ordered 500, and I think that was one pallet. It was 250 quid. We can also mark it off on this little bit of our shopping list here, which we'll talk about this more when we get to the concrete blocks, and we can mark it off on this section here. There's probably a few other things we can mark off on here. We've got the mesh for the foundations, we've got the spacers, we've got the rebar, tie wire, resin fixing, so they're all done and dusted now. And then we get onto the tricky bit, the concrete blocks. We need a whole load of concrete blocks. These things are really heavy, so you don't want to be ordering too many because they're not particularly easy to return, and ultimately everything needs to be moved from the front of the house to the back of the house so it can be stored. So we want to get this figure pretty much bob on. So we'll start with the rear extension because that's the easiest one to kind of see what's going on. So we've basically got two kind of not quite trapezoid walls, but you get the general idea. So this is basically a rectangle with a triangle on top. So all we need to do is measure across from the lowest point and measure the area of that as one rectangle, and then treat this up a bit as another rectangle, but then divide that in two. So on our magic spreadsheet, it's these two kind of rows here. So we know the length, we know the height. That gives an area of the bottom rectangle of 9.09 square meters, and then we've got the triangle bit above that. We know the length, we know the height, and in our magic little formula we are dividing that figure by 2. So that basically means that the total area is that plus that, which is that. So 11.31 square meters. We rounded it up to 12 square meters to be on the safe side. For the back wall, well, most of it is the bifold doors and the window for the kitchen, so it's only really this little area here. So again, really easy to work that out. We can take measurements straight off our plan here in SketchUp just to double check everything. I briefly mentioned that there's a row of blocks to go below DPC level internally. That's only half a square meter, but we'll round it up to 1 square meter. We need pretty much exactly the same on the back wall as well, so another 1 square meter of blocks there. And the bit above DPC, as I say, with the kitchen window, that works out at about 9 square meters, so ticking the box there. So then we've just got this great big 2-story side wall, which is basically a rectangle, and we've got the bit above the back garage door and the bit above the front garage door. 30 square meters for the side, 5 square meters for the front, and 5 square meters for the back. So now that we've worked out the area of each wall, all we need to do is work out what we need in terms of inner leaf and outer leaf and all that sort of thing. And that is what this table here is for. So we've got rear right hand side, we've got exactly the same for the left hand side. We've then got our 9 square meters for the back wall. So we've got the inner leaf and outer leaf of the cavity wall and that extra row of 1 square meters below DPC level. So that caters for the back wall. And then everything left over there is for the side extension, for the 2-story side extension. It's all rectangles. It's all from the figures that we talked about earlier. So that gives us a total of 149 square meters. And what I was talking about earlier about knowing how many concrete blocks it takes per square meter, it's about 10 blocks per square meter. And it's also useful at this stage to know that you get 90 on a pallet. So we're looking at 1,490 concrete blocks, 1,490 divided by 90 per pallet. So 16 pallets, 16 and a half pallets technically would do it. If we just go for 16 pallets, because as I say, we don't want to be left with loads of leftover blocks, that would work out at 1,440 blocks. So worst case scenario, we're going to be shy of 50 blocks. But I know that I've got loads of leftover blocks from building the studio room, so I think we're going to be fine with just 16 pallets. And that is what we ended up ordering. So 16 pallets of concrete blocks came to £1,828.80. And fingers crossed we ordered the correct amount, because if we didn't order enough, we've got a bricklayer with nothing to do, and if we order too many, well, they're not the easiest thing in the world to return. So hand on heart, this is our leftover pile of materials after the build. And towards the end of the build, I was getting really nervous that we were going to run out of concrete blocks, so I actually nipped to Wickes and picked up 4 extra concrete blocks, believe it or not. And what you are seeing here is 4 leftover concrete blocks. Those are trench blocks on the end there. By some complete fluke, we ordered exactly the right number of blocks. So that was lucky. We weren't quite as fortunate with the engineering bricks, and we ran out and I had to pick up a few extra ones to build the sleeper walls underneath the kitchen floor. But they're dead easy to pick up from pretty much anywhere. Now, it's worth mentioning at this stage that the closer and closer you get to a build being complete, the easier it gets to work out what remaining materials you're going to need. What you absolutely don't want is a situation where you've got tradespeople who can't do any work because you haven't ordered enough stuff. So I don't suggest sailing that close to the wind. You're generally going to be better off having too much rather than too little, and most builders merchants will accept returns minus a small restocking fee. Then we've got cavity wall insulation. That was another important one to pre-order because the Britty couldn't do anything without it. Really easy to work out. I'm just going to put a quick filter on this table here. I'm going to filter it by outer leaf only, and we just need to know the total area of all the walls above DP sea level, which is 73 square meters exactly. So a pack of insulation will tell you the square meterage that it will cover for this particular one, which was ice over 100mm cavity slabs that we used, and each pack covers 6.55 square meters. We're looking at 73 square meters in total. 73 over 6.55 is 11 packs. So we ordered 12 insulation packs. So that is insulation tick in the box, or cavity insulation at least. So that's £432.80 on that. Why have I got, there's only 11 there. That should be 12. And I'll talk about all this stuff in a minute, because now we're on to the next big ticket item that we need to get ordered and ready. And for that, I've got an entirely separate sheet on this magic spreadsheet, and we'll go into what all of this kind of means, well, like now. So for the timber work, we're back to the structural engineer drawings, and we are going to have to grab a pen and paper and make a whole load of notes about timber sizes and distances between rafters and all that sort of thing. So we'll start off with the rear extension. Again, ignore this kind of left-hand bit that we didn't bother building, and we've got the bifolds here, kitchen window here. All we really need to know on this page, it says extension roof to include minimum 200 by 500 C16 rafters at 600mm centres. And by the way, we went for C24 timbers for everything because the price difference wasn't that much, and we figured C24 is better than C16. The only area where we use C16 timbers was for internal stud work and stuff like that. Back to our SketchUp drawing, and I think I made a more detailed video about this, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but basically I properly worked out exactly where the windows are going to go, and that allowed us to work out exactly how many rafters we need, and obviously the ledger board for the back, all the wall plates and everything else. One thing to look out for here, 4.8 meters is pretty much a standard length for wood, so if you've got a really long extension, you're going to have to try and work out a supplier for longer bits of wood. As it was with, I think it was a 17-degree pitch, we were looking at minimum 4.4 meters. We extended the eaves slightly to give us a better overhang, which meant that we had very little wastage from 4.8 meter rafters. So here is our spreadsheet for different types of timbers and things like that. So what we're looking at here, these are the 200 mil, 200 by 50, 4.8, kitchen rafters, etc. But basically we're looking at the total of these three boxes here, so that 32 lengths of 4.8 meter, so that covers those three there, bish bash bosh, and that covers that row there and that one there. For the hipped roof, the structure engineer has said here we need minimum 150 by 50 C16s at 600 centres. We went for C24s at 400 centres, so over-engineered as per usual. And we also need 225 by 50 C24s for the hips and 225 by 50 C24 for the ridge. Again, relatively easy to work all of this out. Back to our magic spreadsheet, we've got the hip rafters here, so we ended up needing 15 of those, and we've got the hips and ridge here. The hips needed to be really long, so this was actually a special order of the 225 by 50, 5.4 meter length that we needed of that, but the builder's merchant managed to find those for us, no problem. So basically 3 lengths of those, and the rest are all these 150 by 50 C24s, which we're going to need loads of those, so we'll come back to that in a minute. And by the way, here's the ridge support trimmer that I briefly talked about earlier. Again, it's all specced out in the drawings, so 2 lots of 200 by 50, it says C16, again we use C24s for those. Floor joists, again it's all in the drawings, 150 by 50 C16s, we went C24s at 400 centres, so that basically covers our floor joists for the bedroom floor. We're missing a joist there for some reason. And exactly the same for the kitchen floor as well, so it's just a question of adding it all up, what you need. Again, just be careful on the size of whatever you're building that it's not too big for standard size joists. So that covers our kitchen floor joists, bedroom floor joists, and kitchen ledger board as well. And we needed ledger boards for the garage wall to support the bedroom joists as well, because we went down the bolted ledger board route, which I think is much easier than embedding them in the masonry, but whatever floats your boat. And then all that's left over really is wall plates. So there was a whole load of wall plates. Again, worked it all out based on the architects and the structural engineer drawings. The wall plates are basically the bit of wood that goes at the top of the wall, and that supports all the roofing members and things like that. So there was almost 60 linear meters of wall plates, but that basically covers these bits at the top here. So that's 6 lengths of 100 by 50 and 6 lengths of 100 by 75. I can't remember using 100 by 75. I don't know if we doubled up 50s or what. Either way, that's kind of what we ended up using. Maybe we did use 100 by 75s. Honestly, my memory. So that really covers most of the big stuff, and everything else, like plasterboard, you just work it out by area, flooring, you work it out by area, rigid insulation, again, it's just by area. In terms of actual bags of plaster and dot and dab adhesive and bonding and all that, we just got our plasterer to estimate how much they would need, and we supplied everything. And then I'll quickly run over this little section down the bottom here. This really is just to make a note of all the different SKUs for your dumpy bags, so your big kind of 1 ton bag things. So sharp sand, which is predominantly used for blinding courses, MOT type 1 for subbase, 10mm gravel for drainage, 20mm gravel is decorative. And it's also worth mentioning as well, we used pre-mixed mortar which just got delivered every kind of other day as we needed it. But we also ordered a dumpy bag of building sand and 7 bags of cement, just in case we ran out of the pre-mixed stuff. And that's really handy, because if you run out of the ready-mix mortar, you don't want to be ordering an entire new tub if it's like a Friday afternoon or something like that, in which case we'd just put a batch on. And it's useful to know that for a dumpy bag, you're looking at about 7 bags of cement, and that should be enough cement to do a 5-to-1 mix of all of the sand in the dumpy bag. So that covers all of those kind of granulated materials, if you like. Lintels, again, that's all based on the structural engineer plans. It tells you literally on the drawings what lintels to use. And Velux windows, again, the architect specified these MK08s, and as it happened, our builders merchants had those in stock for immediate delivery, which was awesome. So obviously this has just been our approach to quantity surveying, and it worked well for a build of this size, but it's worth mentioning if you don't want to go into the granular detail of stuff yourself, you can pay a company to do the estimating for you. There's even online estimators these days where you just upload your plans and they tell you everything you need to buy. I'm not going to talk about that because I've never used them and know nothing about it, but it neatly leads us on to another much bigger building project that's going on YouTube at the minute, and our friends at the restoration couple Tim and Joe are embarking on a barn conversion that, honestly, if you want to see a bigger building project, I would highly recommend checking out their channel because it's on a whole nother scale to what we've embarked on. Also remember, if you want to know more about using SketchUp and having a look at the plans that we've used for doing our house extension, it's all over on the Member Zone. There's a full little SketchUp mini course to get you up and running on SketchUp. The first part of the course is completely free. It'll get you up and running really quickly. And if you find you want to get into it in a little bit more detail, you can subscribe on the Member Zone, and that'll give you access to the rest of that course and a whole load of extra videos and content that you can only get access to as a member of the Member Zone. Members.gosforthhandyman.com. You are literally keeping this show on the road by helping to support this channel directly, and your support is amazingly appreciated. You are wonderful people. As I say, all of the documents that I've used in today's video are on the Member Zone as well for you to download. Links down in the description below and in the pinned comment if I remember to do that. Finally, I did mention earlier that I would give you a top tip if you are embarking on a reasonable sized building project of any description, and that is get yourself an account at a builder's merchant, like a proper credit account, so you're not messing on with credit cards and cash transactions and stuff like that. Having an actual account at a builder's merchant makes life so much easier, trust me on that one. Even if they're not happy to give you a credit limit straight away, what you can do is just pre-fund the account with like $5,000 or something like that. We very rarely ordered more than $5,000 worth of material in one go, so a $5,000 credit account worked out really well for us. It just meant the whole ordering process was much slicker, and we just settled the invoices as soon as they turned up, so the account was never in arrears. Anyway, we'll leave it there for today. Let me know in the comments any horror stories or interesting situations you've run into with either overestimating or underestimating materials on jobs. How do you manage it? Maybe you're a builder and you have to manage this sort of stuff on a daily basis. I'm kind of guessing with time that you'll just know from looking at a build how many bricks and blocks and things you're going to need, or do you go through it in a similar granular, control freaky way that I did it, or do you use an online estimating service? Let us know down in the comments because we learn so much from each other on this channel. For now, folks, as per usual, look after one another, be nice to one another. We shall see you next time. Tatty bye.